Did you know that the average person spends over 2 hours a day doing absolutely nothing productive? Imagine what your life would look like if you took just half of that wasted time and invested it in yourself. Laziness isn't just a habit, it's a thief, silently stealing your dreams while you scroll, procrastinate, and wait for motivation to magically appear. Today, we're going to hunt it down and kill it once and for all. The first key point is to recognize your laziness as the enemy. Most people think laziness is just a momentary weakness, like yawning at your desk or scrolling endlessly on your phone. But that's the trick, it's not harmless. Laziness is quiet, patient, and cunning. It doesn't announce itself, it creeps in like fog over a familiar path, softening your edges, dimming your ambition, and convincing you that tomorrow is a safe place to live. You've probably noticed this feeling before. The one that whispers, rest a little longer, it's fine to delay, it's not urgent yet. That whisper is not your friend. That whisper is a skilled saboteur, slowly rewriting your potential into excuses. The first step is seeing it clearly, naming it, and refusing to let it disguise itself as comfort. Once you identify laziness as an enemy, you realize how many times it has already shaped your life without you noticing. Think about the dreams you've set aside, the hobbies you never returned to, the books you never finished, the skills you never practiced. Every time you chose ease over effort, you handed over a small piece of your future. There's a story of a young man who always dreamed of running marathons but never trained. He told himself he'd start next Monday, every Monday for 2 years. Eventually, he gave up entirely, not because he couldn't, but because laziness had taught him that postponement felt safer than challenge. Recognizing laziness is seeing how much you've let it steal and understanding that it thrives in the invisible gaps of your life. Seeing it is not enough. You also need to feel it. Laziness is not abstract, it's physical, emotional, and mental. It settles in your chest as lethargy, in your mind as indecision, and in your schedule as empty hours that vanish without notice. It's the weight that keeps you in bed a little too long. The hesitation before starting a task, the internal tug of war between what you want and what is easy. When you sit down and truly notice these moments, you see patterns. The person who waits for perfect motivation to start writing, exercising, or learning is not weak. They are captured by laziness. Feeling it deeply, not judgmentally, is the next step toward liberation. Laziness often comes dressed as rationality. It says, "You deserve rest," or "You've worked hard enough today." At first, these statements feel like care, like wisdom, but underneath them they are lies that lull you into inertia. I remember a woman who told herself she couldn't pursue her side business because her day job left her exhausted. Yet when she traced her evenings, she realized she spent hours scrolling social media, absorbed in trivial entertainment. Laziness had wrapped itself in justification. Recognizing it means stripping away these comfortable disguises and seeing the truth. Every excuse is a door laziness uses to creep further into your life. The danger of ignoring laziness is that it multiplies silently. One skipped workout becomes 2, one postponed project becomes a series, one day of delay becomes months of stagnation. It's like a quiet vine growing in a garden. You don't notice it at first, but soon it strangles the flowers you planted with care. I knew a young man who wanted to learn guitar. For weeks he promised himself he'd practice later, and soon his guitar gathered dust while his friends progressed online. Recognizing laziness as the enemy is recognizing the vine for what it is before it strangles your potential. It's noticing the subtle patterns before they become irreversible habits. Awareness alone is not defeat, it is strategy. When you see laziness for what it is, you gain clarity. You start noticing the triggers, the couch at night, the open tabs on a browser, the notification that pulls you into distraction. You can intercept it before it takes hold. There's a story of a man who wanted to wake early for an hour of study. For months he struggled, blaming fatigue. When he tracked his evenings, he realized he was on his phone until midnight. Recognizing laziness didn't just mean seeing his habit. It meant understanding the invisible choices that fed it so he could change them. Awareness transforms passive defeat into active combat. Finally, recognizing laziness is an act of compassion toward yourself. You stop blaming yourself for being lazy in vague, self-critical ways and instead approach it as a challenge to overcome. It is both mirror and map. You see yourself honestly, flaws and all, and simultaneously gain a roadmap to reclaim your time and energy. A man I once met wanted to write a book, but always postponed it. When he realized that laziness wasn't his fault but a condition to confront, he began carving 30 minutes each day to write. Slowly, page by page, he reclaimed not just his book, but his sense of self-discipline. Recognizing laziness is seeing the enemy clearly and realizing that every enemy beaten leaves you stronger, wiser, and more capable than before. The third key point is to start before you're ready. Most people wait for a perfect moment that never comes, imagining that motivation or clarity will strike like lightning, igniting their effort. But life doesn't work that way. Waiting is a quiet form of surrender. It's telling yourself that conditions must be flawless before you are allowed to act. I once knew a man who wanted to write a novel. He spent months outlining characters, perfecting backstories, and researching settings, yet the pages remained blank. He thought he needed the right inspiration to begin. The day he finally sat down, without preparation or certainty, words poured out like a dam breaking. Starting before he was ready was not reckless. It was the only thing that moved him forward. Starting before you're ready transforms hesitation into motion. That initial step is deceptively small, yet it carries immense power because it breaks the spell of inertia. Imagine pushing a stalled car. You don't wait for the engine to roar on its own. You give it a shove, even if imperfectly, and suddenly momentum begins to work with you. A young woman I know wanted to learn to cook, but the fear of messing up held her back. One evening, she tossed together ingredients, ignoring recipes and doubts. The first burnt dish didn't discourage her, it propelled her. Action created experience, experience created confidence, and confidence became a habit. Laziness fears this first move more than anything else. The paradox of starting before readiness is that readiness often follows action, not precedes it. Motivation does not appear as a precondition, it emerges as a result of doing. I remember a man training for a triathlon who constantly delayed swimming practice, claiming he would get in the mood later. When he forced himself into the pool, muscles stiff and heart racing, he discovered that the action itself produced focus, rhythm, and endurance. Motivation didn't strike from above, it was born from the water he had already entered. Starting first, even imperfectly, turns doubt into momentum. Starting early also teaches humility and self-trust. You realize that you don't need permission from your feelings, energy levels, or circumstances to begin. A woman I once met wanted to launch her podcast, but told herself she needed professional equipment, a polished script, and a perfect voice. When she finally pressed record with just a phone and raw notes, her authenticity resonated with listeners more than any technical perfection could have. Starting before readiness reminds you that you are capable of more than you think, that the act itself is often the teacher, not preparation. There is freedom hidden in imperfection. The first action, no matter how small, fractures the illusion that everything must be flawless before you engage. A young artist hesitated to share her paintings because they were not gallery ready. One morning, she posted a single sketch online, expecting criticism or indifference. Instead, she received encouragement and dialogue that inspired her to create daily. Starting without readiness does not demand mastery. It demands courage, which in time leads to skill, momentum, and clarity. The act of beginning itself begins to teach you what you need to know. The resistance you feel before starting is actually a compass pointing to growth. The tension in your chest, the excuses swirling in your mind, the worry about being unprepared They are all signals that something meaningful is at stake. A young man hesitated to apply for a job outside his comfort zone, convinced he wasn't ready. The moment he submitted the application, he felt a release he had never known, a mix of fear and exhilaration that signaled progress. Laziness loves comfort, but starting before readiness confronts it directly, showing it that action is not dependent on comfort or certainty. Finally, starting before you're ready creates a rhythm that carries forward. The first imperfect step leads to another, and another, until action becomes a river that sweeps away hesitation entirely. I think of a woman learning to run long distances. Her first mile was painful, filled with doubt, every step questioning her stamina. She had no readiness, no perfect conditions, only movement. By the third mile, her body found rhythm, her mind found resolve, and she realized she had unknowingly built momentum that would carry her through the entire marathon. Beginning before readiness is not reckless. It is how life rewards those willing to act in the face of fear, doubt, and uncertainty. The fourth key point is to break it into micro actions. Often, the mountain of a task feels so immense that the mind shuts down before the body even tries. It is in that overwhelming space that laziness thrives, whispering that the effort required is too great and the outcome too distant. I once knew a man who dreamed of writing a book. The thought of hundreds of pages, plots, and characters paralyzed him for months. Then, on a quiet evening, he decided to write just one sentence. That sentence became two. The two became a paragraph, and the paragraph slowly grew into chapters. Breaking the task into micro actions transformed an impossible mountain into a series of small, conquerable hills. Micro actions carry a hidden power that is often underestimated. A young woman I met wanted to declutter her home, a task that felt endless and exhausting. She decided she would only tackle one drawer each day. The first day it was a single utensil drawer, the second day, a closet shelf. Within weeks, the house felt lighter, not because she rushed through it, but because small, consistent actions accumulated into a tangible transformation. Laziness resists these small beginnings because it thrives on delay, but micro actions have a way of quietly breaking down resistance from the inside. The beauty of micro actions is that they create momentum almost imperceptibly. One small effort leads to another, like a single spark igniting a chain of lights. A young man I knew wanted to improve his health, but felt too weak to start an intense exercise routine. He began by simply standing for 10 minutes instead of sitting during breaks, then taking a short walk, then stretching. Over time, these tiny actions compounded into strength and confidence. Laziness cannot sustain itself against consistent micro movement. It retreats when progress is visible, even in miniature. Micro actions also shift focus from fear to process. The brain resists big, abstract goals because it cannot calculate every step required to reach them. A woman once told me she wanted to launch her business but froze at the idea of planning everything perfectly. I suggested she simply write one email to one potential client. That single, simple action carried more impact than weeks of preparation. Micro actions transform an intimidating vision into manageable reality, dissolving fear and inertia. With each deliberate step, small steps teach the mind a lesson that laziness refuses to accept. Action is more effective than hesitation. A young musician I met wanted to compose an album but felt paralyzed by expectations. I asked him to record just 30 seconds of melody each day. That tiny fragment, repeated daily, became a song, then two, and eventually an album. Micro actions prove to the subconscious that movement is possible, that progress exists, and that even tiny efforts are meaningful. Laziness cannot argue with results that slowly, quietly emerge. Micro actions create a NSC of mastery that fuels confidence. I once knew a woman who wanted to learn French but dreaded the complexity of grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary. She began with 5 words a day, repeating them until she could recall them effortlessly. That tiny habit built competence, which became motivation, which eventually carried her through entire conversations in the language. Each small action was a victory, a proof that she could overcome inertia, and it added up to mastery that laziness could not touch. Finally, micro actions allow life to teach you lessons you could never anticipate. The young man who started writing one sentence learned discipline, patience, and creativity. The woman decluttering her drawers discovered mindfulness, clarity, and joy in simplicity. Each micro action, no matter how seemingly insignificant, builds a network of skills, habits, and understanding that transforms not just the task at hand, but the person undertaking it. Laziness may try to whisper, "It's too small to matter," but micro actions prove that the smallest steps often carry the heaviest weight of transformation, moving you forward in ways that a single leap never could. The fifth key point is to change your environment. Laziness is like water. It finds the path of least resistance, flowing into every gap, filling every empty space with ease and comfort. If your surroundings are soft, familiar, and full of distractions, laziness will move in quietly and take root, convincing you that idleness is acceptable. I once knew a man who wanted to focus on his studies, but his room was cluttered, his phone constantly buzzing, and his laptop open to endless social media feeds. Every day he sat at his desk, intending to work, but hours passed and nothing was accomplished. It wasn't a failure of willpower, it was a failure of environment. Once he rearranged his space, removed distractions, and created a small area dedicated to focus, his energy shifted almost immediately. The room itself became an ally. Environment shapes behavior more than we realize. Think of a runner who wants to train but lives miles from the nearest trail, or a writer who dreams of finishing a book while constantly surrounded by noise and chaos. The world around you can either act as friction for your intentions or as a conveyor belt for your laziness. I once met a woman who struggled to meditate every morning. Her living room was full of clutter, her phone beside her bed, and her cat always lounging nearby. She decided to create a small, quiet corner with a mat, a candle, and a single chair. That small change transformed her practice from sporadic attempts into a daily ritual. Your environment does not just influence action, it signals to your mind what is possible. Changing your environment is not about perfection, it's about intentionality. One young man I knew wanted to eat healthier but lived in a kitchen stocked with chips, sodas, and sugary snacks. He didn't lack self-control, he lacked environmental design. By replacing the snacks with fruits, nuts, and water, the battle became easier, almost automatic. Laziness, which thrives on frictionless comfort, finds itself blocked when the environment subtly nudges you toward better choices. Even small adjustments, moving the couch, changing your music, rearranging your desk, can create invisible currents that guide you toward action rather than inaction. Environment also shapes emotional states. A cluttered, noisy space can drain energy and make tasks feel heavier than they are, while a clean, organized, and intentional space can lift your mood and sharpen focus. I recall a man who wanted to write but kept delaying because his apartment felt suffocating. He moved a few books, opened the blinds, added a plant, and suddenly mornings felt lighter, ideas clearer. The physical space became a psychological tool, reminding him that productivity and comfort can coexist when designed intentionally. Laziness loses its grip when the surroundings themselves encourage engagement. Sometimes changing your environment is about seeking new spaces entirely. A woman I knew struggled to focus on her painting at home with constant interruptions from family and television. She began visiting a local park in the mornings, sitting in the same spot under a tree, sketching quietly. The park itself became a catalyst for creativity. Laziness, which thrives on habitual Fourth, cannot follow you into spaces that demand presence and attention. The environment becomes a mentor, a silent partner that amplifies your intentions and guides your energy toward action. Your environment also influences the people around you, and the people you surround yourself with can either pull you toward laziness or push you toward discipline. I once knew a man who wanted to improve his fitness but had friends who spent every evening on the couch watching TV. By joining a small running group, he surrounded himself with others who moved, sweated, and persevered. The energy of the environment, the combined momentum of people, space, and activity made his own laziness almost impossible to sustain. Laziness doesn't thrive in motion, it needs stagnation, quiet, and isolation. Finally, changing your environment is an ongoing practice, not a one-time event. It requires observation, honesty, and adjustment. A young woman wanted to focus on her business, but noticed that her home office, which once motivated her, had become cluttered and noisy over time. Each week, she spent a few minutes reorganizing, clearing, and optimizing her space, and each adjustment renewed her energy. The environment is a living system, responding to attention and care. When you tend to it thoughtfully, it can fight alongside you, tipping the scales against laziness in subtle but unstoppable ways. The sixth key point is to make discipline a non-negotiable. Discipline is not restriction, it is the backbone that supports every dream you hold. Without it, even the clearest vision can dissolve into distraction, and the strongest intention can fizzle into excuses. I once knew a young man who wanted to become a pianist. Every morning he promised himself he would practice, yet the moment he felt even a hint of fatigue, he would put the piano cover back on and retreat to his bed. It wasn't lack of talent that held him back, it was the absence of non-negotiable discipline. The turning point came when he declared to himself that practice was not optional, that the first note of each day belonged to him, regardless of mood or comfort. That simple commitment transformed his scattered effort into steady growth. Discipline is the bridge between goals and reality. It turns abstract intentions into tangible results. I remember a woman who dreamed of writing a novel. She didn't wait for inspiration or perfect energy. She carved out 2 hours every morning, no excuses, and she wrote. Some days the words flowed, some days they crawled. The key was that she honored her commitment. Each session, however imperfect, added bricks to the foundation of her book. Laziness struggles most against consistent, repeated action. Discipline does not negotiate, it simply moves one step at a time until the momentum crushes hesitation. Discipline is often misunderstood as rigid or joyless. In reality, it creates freedom. A man I knew wanted to run long distances, but without discipline, he relied on fleeting motivation. Some days he ran, most days he did not. Then he created a rule: no matter what, he would run for 15 minutes daily. Soon the short runs became longer, the hesitations vanished, and running became part of his identity. Paradoxically, the structure of discipline gave him the freedom to move effortlessly through his days, while laziness remained trapped in indecision and delay. The power of discipline lies in showing up when you don't feel like it. Energy and motivation are unreliable. They rise and fall like waves. A young woman I met wanted to learn a foreign language. She often felt tired or distracted, tempted to skip her lessons. But the commitment to discipline forced her to sit, even when her mind resisted. Over months, she noticed that momentum followed action. The resistance that felt impossible at first slowly diminished because showing up consistently rewired her brain to expect effort as the default. Laziness cannot withstand this kind of predictable, unwavering presence. Discipline also builds resilience in ways that shortcuts never can. A man I knew wanted to run a small business, but every challenge felt overwhelming. Instead of yielding to frustration, he created daily non-negotiables: 1 hour of focused work, one call to a client, one task completed before checking email. Those small, consistent acts of discipline became armor, shaping his ability to face larger obstacles with confidence. Discipline doesn't remove difficulty, but it makes you capable of enduring it, turning struggle into practice and resistance into strength. Discipline becomes the voice you trust when temptation whispers otherwise. I recall a young artist who wanted to paint every day, but life often offered distractions, friends, errands, endless scrolling. When she committed to disciplined practice, the decision to paint became automatic. Even when she felt drained, her inner voice reminded her, not with judgment but with certainty, this is what you do. Laziness cannot argue with certainty and structure. It thrives only in doubt, indecision, and absence. F rules. By making discipline a non-negotiable, you remove the space in which laziness can operate. Finally, discipline is cumulative. Each act compounds on the last, creating a quiet power that cannot be measured day by day, but becomes undeniable over months and years. A young man learning martial arts practiced diligently, even when progress seemed invisible. Weeks became months, and months became mastery he hadn't imagined possible. Laziness tries to convince you that the results aren't immediate, that effort is wasted, but discipline accumulates silently, invisibly, like water carving through rock. Every action, repeated without exception, builds a force that eventually overwhelms hesitation, fear, and the inertia of comfort. The seventh key point is to reward momentum, not just results. Too often, we wait for grand achievements to celebrate, as if the only victories that matter are the ones with applause, certificates, or recognition attached. But life does not work in leaps, it works in waves, small rhythms that build over time. I once knew a young woman learning to play the violin. She would practice daily, but after weeks without noticeable improvement, she felt defeated. One evening, she celebrated the first piece she could play without stopping, even though it was simple and imperfect. That small acknowledgement fueled her to practice again the next day, and again the next. The joy of momentum became stronger than the frustration of imperfection. Momentum is like a rolling stone, it gains force silently, quietly, until stopping it seems impossible. I met a man who wanted to run a marathon, but struggled with consistency. The first day he ran a mile. The second, a mile and a half. He celebrated each increment, the mile conquered, the extra half added. Each small success was a spark, and the cumulative effect ignited a rhythm that carried him through longer runs without dread. Laziness feeds on stagnation, but when progress, even tiny progress, is acknowledged, it creates a current too strong to resist. Celebrating the steps keeps the current flowing. Rewarding momentum reshapes your perception of effort. A young woman I knew wanted to learn coding. The first program she completed barely worked, and she considered it a failure. But when she paused to recognize her small accomplishment, the hours spent learning, the logic she applied, her confidence grew. Each small recognition was like a pat on the shoulder from life itself, saying, "You're moving, keep moving." Laziness loses its grip when the mind feels the weight of its own persistent effort, even if the final result is far away. Momentum also teaches patience and presence. I remember a man training for a difficult hike. The summit seemed impossibly distant, and he was tempted to quit after the first few hours. Instead, he focused on the next step, the next rock, the next handhold, and every small milestone became a moment to celebrate. With each step acknowledged, he built not only endurance but also a deep trust in his capacity to persist. Laziness thrives in the distance, in imagining the impossibility of the whole journey. Rewarding momentum shrinks the mountain into manageable steps. Rewarding momentum strengthens identity. A young writer I knew didn't finish books, not because he lacked ideas, but because he dismissed progress until the novel was complete. When he began Celebrate, ink pages written, paragraphs polished, and chapters finished, he started seeing himself as someone who creates, not someone who delays. Laziness cannot survive when identity aligns with action. Each small reward for momentum becomes a reinforcement, a confirmation that you are the type of person who moves, who builds, who persists. Small celebrations also build resilience against setbacks. A woman training for triathlons faced injuries and slow days. She began to reward herself for every swim completed, every extra push on the bike, every step running despite discomfort. Those acknowledgements created a buffer against frustration, reminding her that progress exists even in imperfection. Laziness cannot argue with this momentum. It shrinks in the face of consistent, visible movement, proof that action matters more than comfort or ideal conditions. Finally, momentum itself becomes a force that fuels further action. A young musician learning the piano would reward herself not with trophies, but by playing one piece she loved after practice. Each piece completed became a stepping stone to the next challenge. Gradually, the chain of momentum grew so strong that laziness found no foothold, no opportunity to pause or delay. Rewarding movement, rather than only results, trains your mind to value consistency, to trust progress, and to build an unstoppable rhythm that carries you forward day after day, step after step. When you look at laziness now, you see it for what it truly is, not a flaw, not a judgment, not a permanent state, but a force that has lived quietly in the background of your life, shaping days, choices, and moments you could have owned. Every step we've explored, the awareness, the why, the small starts, the micro actions, the environment, the discipline, the momentum, they are threads in a single fabric, the life you are capable of weaving when you refuse to surrender to comfort. Laziness loses its power when met with clarity, when met with intention, when met with the quiet, steady insistence that your potential is worth more than delay. You don't need perfect conditions, overwhelming inspiration, or sudden energy. You only need a commitment to the first step, the next step, and the one after that. Life does not reward hesitation, it rewards consistent presence. The transformation isn't loud, it isn't immediate, it happens in the small decisions, the gentle corrections, the tiny victories that accumulate until suddenly you realize you have moved farther than you ever imagined, and you did it without anyone noticing, except yourself. There will be days when resistance feels heavier, when laziness whispers louder, when the world seems to conspire for comfort. That is when the work we've explored matters most. Every micro action, every environmental choice, every disciplined act, every recognition of momentum, they are tools, not rules, to guide you through those moments. They are the quiet architecture of a life where action becomes natural, where effort is not punishment, but the rhythm of living fully in your own strength. And in the stillness after effort, you will feel it. A clarity that was impossible before, a steadiness that nothing can shake, a trust in yourself that no voice of doubt can diminish. Laziness may always whisper, but it no longer dictates. It becomes background noise, an echo of a habit you've outgrown. What remains is your focus, your presence, your quiet insistence that each day, each hour, each action matters because it is yours. When you step back into your life, carry this with you, that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the choice to keep moving despite it. Every choice you make to act, to persist, to honor your intentions is a declaration that your time, your energy, and your potential are yours to steward. And in that stewardship, laziness cannot follow. It fades in the light of presence, clarity, and consistent effort, leaving you with nothing but the quiet certainty that you are moving toward who you are meant to be.